Move on to our public comment period at this time. And our first speaker is going to be Anita Hill, Dr. Hill, who's the head of medical affairs for Alexion. And Anita, please declare any potential conflicts of interest before your remarks. Welcome here.
Thank you very much indeed. And as on the slide, I'm a full-time employee at Alexion. Firstly, could I just say greetings to all the time zones, and we really appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's meeting. As well as the conflict on the slide, I would like to introduce myself. I previously worked as a physician in the UK National Health Service for 24 years. I was the lead clinician for the UK National PNH Service, and I therefore managed more than 500 patients with this rare disease, and I did publish extensively on the topic. My PhD was awarded for exploring the role of complement in hemolytic anemias, including PNH. As many know, Alexion has been a pioneer in complement biology for more than 30 years, leading the path with PNH, but also serving patients and families affected by many rare diseases and devastating conditions through the discovery and development of life-changing medicines. Ravulizumab has become the standard of care in PNH in the US due to its effectiveness in controlling what is important in this disease: terminal complement activity and intravascular hemolysis. In PNH, it is the uncontrolled terminal complement activation that leads to intravascular hemolysis, thrombosis, organ damage, and premature mortality. So this is much more than a disease of anemia and hemoglobin. The advent of C5 inhibitors transformed the natural history of PNH over the past 2 decades, first with eculizumab and then with ravulizumab or Ultomiris. Ravulizumab, with its improved pharmacokinetics, does provide immediate, complete, and sustained terminal complement inhibition. And this inhibition results in control of intravascular hemolysis, reduction in thrombosis risk, and extended patient survival to more than 97% over 6 years of follow-up. The sustained and targeted inhibition of terminal complement activity should never be compromised. We need to avoid that intravascular breakthrough hemolysis that Dr. Mackham described earlier, both in rate as well as severity. In addition to these important results, ravulizumab only needs to be administered every 8 weeks for adults following an initial loading dose and achieves that important complete and sustained terminal complement inhibition with that dosing schedule. So use of ravulizumab has demonstrated reduction in overall resource use and is cost saving for patients with PNH. Approximately 10 to 20% of patients experience clinically significant extravascular hemolysis while treated with C5 inhibitors, which may impact quality of life. What's important to remember is that extravascular hemolysis and hemoglobin level does not impact survival in this disease. The significant morbidity and mortality in PNH is a result of terminal complement activity and intravascular hemolysis. Alexion developed danicopan, the first in-class oral factor D inhibitor that targets complement alternative pathway activity. I would like to stress that the ALPHA trial is a phase 3 double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, just as Dr. Brindis, Dr. Lee were asking for double-blind placebo-controlled trials. This was not an open-label trial, and we did manage to do this in this rare disease. And it was designed to evaluate the efficacy and safety of danicopan versus placebo as an add-on treatment to ravulizumab or eculizumab in patients with PNH living with clinically significant extravascular hemolysis. Danicopan demonstrated, as you heard, statistically and clinically significant improvement in hemoglobin, 2.94 grams per deciliter, which may result in significant improvements in FACIT-fatigue scores, which is clinically meaningful for patients. 83% of patients did not need transfusion, and this was significant compared to the comparator arm. Danicopan improved hemoglobin and reduced the need for transfusion by addressing the clinically significant EVH, while importantly maintaining control of intravascular hemolysis. As ICER pointed out in the revised evidence report, Danicopan as an add-on to ravulizumab or eculizumab offers the dual protection against both intra and extravascular hemolysis, plus the greater certainty of protection against thrombosis. If I could have just 30 seconds. In addition, Danicopan demonstrates a favorable benefit-risk profile included in the long-term extension period. So to finish, we are incredibly excited about Danicopan, which if approved in the US will be an important and meaningful addition for the management of clinically significant extravascular hemolysis in a subpopulation of patients with PNH treated with ravulizumab or eculizumab. Importantly, with Danicopan as an add-on to those therapies, what is key for patients, the terminal complement inhibition, is not compromised. And the long-term benefits for patients, such as reduction in thromboses and improved survival that have been demonstrated with ravulizumab, may continue. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate here, and we do remain steadfast in our commitment to serving patients living with PNH. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. And again, I want to also thank you for your willingness to participate in ICER. We think that having companies involved with our drugs under discussion, it's important to be here. So thank you. At this time, I would like to ask if any of our CTAF colleagues have any directed questions for Anita.
I have a quick question for Dr. Hill.
Fire away.
Okay. Again, thank you, Dr. Hill, for being here. Obviously, we would have loved to have you on the PRT to talk about some of the policy issues in this space. So I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Obviously, Danicopan is not yet approved, so we use the placeholder price in the model, since we don't have a price for that yet. However, it seems there could be an opportunity for outcome-based contracting in this space. Is this something you all have considered, and could you speak to the possibility?
Thank you very much indeed for the question. I would just like to reiterate that I come from the medical side of the company. So what I can tell you while we are awaiting approval for Danicopan in the US, that we're proud of the potentially life-changing benefits of this therapy, and we are very committed to having a broad access to patients. We very much recognize it's an add-on treatment, and that will be taken into consideration. But I have no further information at this point on the price until we have an approval.
Thank you.
Kim?
Yes. If it's an add-on, would we be less concerned about amplification from missed doses?
Thank you very much again, Dr. Gregory, a great question. That is a very important distinction between monotherapy agents, where if you have the sustained terminal complement inhibition with eculizumab or ravulizumab, and that is what is preventing the life-threatening complications, the way I said it in my previous life as a physician was, you need terminal complement inhibition to save lives. The proximal complement inhibition is there to improve the quality of life, which is also very important for those patients suffering with clinically significant extravascular hemolysis. But you're completely right. If you have the safety net of terminal complement inhibition, if you miss a dose of Danicopan, you're still protected from the life-threatening consequences of PNH.
Dr. Lee.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of circle back. Thank you, Dr. Hill. Again, I wanted to second Dr. Brindis's comment about it's so helpful to have scientific officers from the manufacturers to speak on these discussions. I wanted to circle back to Dr. Melnikow's comment earlier about because these studies are small and obviously they're huge, because this is such a rare disease, it's harder to have larger studies. But one concern that I would have of any time that you are inhibiting a pathway at several points is that whether there are synergistic effects, whether that can actually cause harm. And given the relatively small size, I wonder about if there is a concern that just like, I guess the only kind of similar thing that I have clinical experience in is like when you have anticoagulation and antiplatelet therapy, the risk of bleeding goes up more. It's not additive, it's more multiplicative. And so I wonder about complement exists in our bodies, all of us, for very good evolutionary reasons. And so whether there was any harms that weren't seen in these in these human trials because they are so small for the rare disease issues that we've already talked about.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Lee, and really important to highlight safety as always. Firstly, to go back, let's say even 20 years, when we were talking about terminal complement inhibition in PNH. Firstly, the reason why terminal complement inhibition, and that's from C5 and beyond. So this is what eculizumab and ravulizumab achieve. We looked at patients with inherited complement protein deficiencies, and we learned a lot from looking at those patients. And what that group taught us was that patients with terminal complement deficiencies, and therefore patients who are on eculizumab or ravulizumab, actually have a pretty normal lifespan and quality of life. And their only risk, still an important risk, but their only risk is actually the meningococcal infection, for which we have many mitigation strategies, and we have seen over the last 20 years of eculizumab and ravulizumab treatment the rates that will be publicly available, which are very reassuring. You are quite right that adding proximal complement inhibition therapy or monotherapy needs to be explored, and we only have short-term data. But looking at the literature, the addition doesn't compound in the same way maybe that the anticoagulation and the different targeting of the coagulation cascade. So we haven't seen evidence of any additive or multiplicative effects from that, but the time is too short and we do need to watch that. But what's very important in the literature from inherited complement deficiencies such as C3, complement deficiency, which is inherited, not acquired, is that there can be life-threatening infections and pyogenic infections, which are quite different to terminal complement inhibition. So thank you.
Thanks, Nita, for your being here again today, and we encourage long-term follow-up in a registry format. I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Evan Rossman, please introduce yourself and any conflicts of interest.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? My name is Evan Rossman. I am a patient of PNH. I just want to first thank you, everyone on this call, for everything you've done to help the community. A little more context. I've had the disease. I'm 29 years old. I've had it since I was 26, so I've had it for around 3 years now. Yeah, and so I just with any questions or about how my life's been with PNH and living with it and sort of concerns and just what I deal with, day to day, I would say that currently it's definitely something that with my treatment schedule and the way I've been, operating has definitely changed my life as a 26-year-old male living in New York City. And so a lot of things change, and especially with, right now I have a lot of weddings, I have a lot of business trips where I'm traveling, and it's definitely harder for me to navigate that with my current schedule and with the treatment options currently available. Yeah, and so throughout this process, where I started and where I'm at today is that my hemoglobin was at like a 5.5. It's sort of leveled out at 11.4 currently. But that being said, I was a very active person. And so I did not realize that I had a lower hemoglobin until, diagnosis, until my skin started changing colors basically, and I became a little, I guess less flushed per se. Yeah, and I think more so with my experience with PNH and so far in the lifespan, that I've had the disease is that it's been hard to sort of manage my schedule when it comes to where my treatments are and how often I'm getting them and where I have to travel to. And that's really, other than that, I've been living, I would say, as normal a life as I can before PNH to now. I'm still, trying to exercise. Obviously, everyone's experience is different, but I'm still exercising at least 3 times a week. I'm able to, still hold a job, still, talk to friends and family and go to social gatherings as well. But it's been, scheduling has been a huge change. And that's something that, with this panel and just in general as advancements in, the medical community around this disease and improve, hopefully, improve moving forward. That's really my biggest thing is scheduling, as well as obviously, coverage with insurance. And that was something as a 26-year-old, I just got off my parents' insurance and I had to learn very quickly how much drugs cost in the pharmaceutical industry, and it was it's overwhelming to say the least. So I think that now 3 years in, and no means I'm an expert in that, but it was the first couple medical bills, and this was during COVID. I was switching jobs, were staggering and of extreme concern and stress, and I go to a therapist because of it, but whatever, that's too much information. But it was definitely something that came up in the beginning, but as I became more stable and everything became more routine, it was something that I was able to manage and control. And obviously in my current situation, I'm very lucky to do that because of, I currently have a job and where, I'm based in New York City, so I have access to a lot of doctors and opportunities to, be treated in PNH. That's really, what I wanted to share with my experience so far. When it comes to what I think about, day to day is obviously I feel different comparatively to yesterday, today. It changes. It's not really consistent. And that's something that I always say with the disease. But the one thing I focus on is like energy and time management have been something that's extremely important in my life. And in order for me to go to this wedding, go to this bachelor trip, I have to plan it around my treatment as well as around, how much energy I think I will have at that time and having that ability to say yes and no to certain things. So those are just some, those are some of my just day to day, how I've been living my life up to this point. I don't, hopefully this is beneficial. I'm not really sure, but I wanted to just share my point of view, and hopefully, what I've been doing is trying to spread awareness about the disease and learn as much as I can and help anyone that I can who has it or will have it in the future, so they could live a better, more knowledgeable life than, someone who's had it previously like myself. But yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity. And I, again, appreciate everyone's work here on with PNH and helping, advance the science on it.
Evan, thank you so much for coming today and taking the time out of your schedule and sharing your perspectives. Some of our CTAF members have some questions for you for sure. Catherine?
Yeah, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Could you talk more about your quality of life and how you perceive it changing with different treatments, and what's important to you?
Of course. So what I, being, I would say, I don't think I'm young anymore, but being at my current age, I live in New York. I was just out of college and starting my work career. My quality of life was definitely affected in the sense mentally, I think was the biggest impact on me. I was, physically for me, I was biking 20 miles a day before the disease. I was biking 20 miles on 5.5 hemoglobin. So it really didn't affect me that much physically. And I think that's a rarity when I talk to other PNH patients. But for me, it was the mental aspect of dealing with a terminal illness and dealing with, you know, a lot of more life questions when it comes to this disease, treatments, that whole scheduling. And what it, you know, I'm someone who's very open to other treatments, other forms, you know, advancements. Like I am very open to that, and anything that is obviously tested and tried and recommended, I'm willing to look into it and figure out if it works best for me. But I would say that my quality of life definitely changed, and it was more of a mental aspect than a physical aspect. But you know, that affected me in the sense that, you know, running a marathon or reaching certain goals that I wanted to, both professionally and physically, have definitely, you know, I've been stunted in that because of the, you know, the diagnosis and the disease and the treatment and everything moving forward.
Thanks, Evan. We just have a few minutes, so very quick questions and answers. Kim?
Yeah, you kept mentioning the word scheduling, so I just want to understand, can you sometimes schedule early so that you can do these things?
N-
Can you get the infusions out of town? And would you be interested in oral pills?
I would, to keep it short, I would of course be interested in oral pills. I cannot schedule it any earlier due to insurance purposes. I cannot get it in other places than New York currently, because I would have to go through another specialist in hematology in those other states. And it would be, I've looked and tried, I've actually, you know, I've business in Ireland and London, and it would have been too much of a pain for the insurance to accept it, as well as for me to find doctors in that place. So it's not really an option, unfortunately.
Joanna,
Thank
our
you.
thanks. Joanna, our last question.
Yeah, so quickly, because we've talked a lot about the data being, it's not long-term data, it's short-term data. From your perspective at this point in the game, if you had an option of the oral pill that would solve a lot of those problems you've just described, would you be willing to does the risk benefit juggle fall from your perspective on the side of, yeah, I would definitely want to try it?
So it's something that I'm actually currently dealing with, of switching treatments, and because of the scheduling thing. And so to keep it short, I would try it, but it's definitely really risky for me because I think I'm doing really well on my current treatment. So the only concern with me is about switching and seeing how my body reacts. And I have to do more research and talk to specialists, my friends and family, about, you know, if that's worth it, and if it's worth it to move forward with a different treatment, whether that be orally or just, you know, a different form of cadence that I'm currently at.
Thank you.
Evan, thanks again for dialing in and being with us today. We really appreciated your insight and your perspective. So at this time, Steve, I think we'll break for lunch and come back 10 minutes to the top of the hour, whether you're in Pacific time, that'd be 11:50, or East Coast time, 2:50 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for a great morning session.